Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's Pandas Prose with Alison Pearce Stevens and Danielle Brigida. We're so excited to have you. We're going to get started in just a moment. All right, well, it is 11:31 in the East Coast, so thank you so much. We're going to go ahead and get started with today's Pandas Prose. And happy Leap Day, all. I have a friend's birthday today, actually, so it's an extra special day for him since it only comes every 4 years. But my name is Jenna Bonello, and for today's purposes, I will be your esteemed host. Before we begin, I just wanted to go over a few logistics. This is a Zoom webinar, which means all participant cameras have been turned off and your audio is on mute, but you're able to ask questions throughout via the chat. So please feel free to fire away. We love audience questions. And I just wanted to point out today's event is being recorded, so that it will go up on WWF's YouTube page after today. And so this event is actually in anticipation of World Wildlife Day, which is this Sunday, March 3rd, to celebrate the beautiful biodiversity and wildlife and wild places here on Earth. So without further ado, I am joined today by Danielle Brigida, WWF's Senior Director of Wildlife Communications and Strategy. Danielle supports wildlife conservation through strategic communications, focusing on solutions and sharing her love of people and wildlife. And she believes, like we all do, that wildlife are some of the very best climate superheroes. And we're just beyond thrilled to have Dr. Alison Pearce Stevens here with us today to talk about her newest book out March 5th, called Animal Climate Heroes. Alison is an award-winning author who writes fun nonfiction for curious young readers. All of her work is inspired by a love of science and nature. Rhinos in Nebraska, the amazing discovery of the ashfall fossil beds, and Animal Climate Heroes were both named Junior Library Guild Gold Standard selections. And Rhinos also won the Nebraska Book Award in 3 categories. So just super exciting to have you both here today. Thank you so much. And without further ado, Danielle, over to you.
Great. Thank you so much. Well, let's start asking some questions. So, Alison, can you tell me where you are in the world and what you've been up to?
Sure. So I live in Lincoln, Nebraska. So I'm just smack dab in the middle of the United States. I actually spent the last few days in a little tiny town in central Nebraska doing school visits. So I was talking with kids about my books and about writing, and getting them really excited about some of the animals that are in the Animal Climate Heroes book.
Great. So I guess like getting us kicked off, can you talk about what made you want to write this book and kind of your perspective on climate change and how it's evolved over the years?
Sure. So the book actually came about during the pandemic. It was during that shutdown when everybody was stuck at home. And so I was watching a lot of webinars, and in one of them, someone said, "Oh, my favorite fact is that sea otters help fight climate change." And I thought, well, that's really interesting. So that's kind of what kicked off this whole idea. Um, and when I first started, I really kind of honed in on that image. It gave me this mental image, right, of the sea otter battling this climate change um, persona. And when I first started it, it was actually set up like in a boxing ring, like a match. But then as I tried to expand to other animals, it became really repetitive to try to use that, like it's a boxing ring and there's only so much going on there. So I ended up changing it and looking at it more as superheroes. And each of these different animals has their own superpowers that they're bringing to the table.
That's great, and I love that perspective. I think it's something that is very near and dear to my heart. So going back to the book, did it change? Like when you were first researching it, I know you talked about how the boxing match, but did you, as you were researching it, did you uncover things that you really liked or that surprised you, and did it change a lot?
Um, One of the big things that changed, so I just decided to just find every animal I could find out there that had some kind of climate impact. And I'm sure there are so many of them, and most just haven't been studied yet. So I was kind of sticking to what people have been studying and what we knew. Um, so there were a lot, and I had a very long list, and my editor was kind of like, I think this is too much. We're going to have to pare it back. So I did have to end up bringing it down to just the 4 that are featured in the book, but they are by no means the only climate heroes that are out there. So that was one of the big things that happened. In terms of things that kind of surprised me, I mean, it's amazing all the different ways that animals are, um, the different ways that they have an impact on their environment. So in the book, it's not just, so the animals are kind of the climate heroes, but they all have sidekicks. And the sidekicks are the trees and the algae and the bacteria and all of these other organisms that we tend to kind of gloss over or not even think about. But they are really doing the heavy lifting in this situation. And so for me, it was really important that I was really showcasing how the whole system kind of ties in together.
Yeah, and I loved that. So just for people on the webinar, one of the things that this book does is it kind of outlines like the 4 climate or animal heroes that are climate heroes. And then it kind of looks into all the different ways in their environment that they support fighting climate change. But then they also do highlight like the sidekicks and everything else. And I think one thing that, at least working in this field, we talk a lot about how climate change is affecting animals, but we don't talk enough about how animals actually affect climate change. And so it's been a neat way to kind of learn more and just get a more comprehensive view of what's going on. So I loved that. Can you talk, were there any facts that like really stuck out to you or surprised you in your research? Maybe that you included in the book or that you didn't?
So one of the animals that's included, and I actually see in the chat. So the 4 animals that are included are forest elephants, great whales, sea otters, and echidnas. And so echidnas, they live in Australia. I'd heard of them. They are also known as spiny anteaters. And I kind of knew about them, but I didn't know a lot about them. And they are these bizarre, amazing creatures. They so I have a lot of weird facts associated with this one. It's an animal. It's about the size of a house cat. They are not very big. They are covered in spines, kind of like a hedgehog, but they're longer since this is a bigger animal. And they have these big claws on all 4 of their feet that they use for digging. And their rear feet are actually, they face backwards because it helps them dig more efficiently. And they dig so much that one of these little animals moves 8 tons of dirt every year. 16,000 pounds of soil. That's just mind blowing to me. But they're actually closely related to the platypus. And so these are the platypus and the echidna are the only animals and mammals in the world that lay eggs. But it also has a pouch like a kangaroo. I mean, it's just like this really fascinating sort of mishmash of all these other creatures. And and they're super cute. And so it was just this super fun thing to learn about.
Yeah, I can imagine it was probably pretty difficult to choose just 4 animals to feature in the
It
book,
was, yeah.
but echidna is such a great one because I feel, people might know that it's related to the platypus or that it's one of the few monotremes, but maybe they don't know all these quirky facts about it that just make it incredibly lovable. So
Yeah.
it was great to read about it in the book. And actually, I learned some stuff about sea otters and even the ocean when I was reading the book. So loved kind of learning from that. What made you decide to target to young readers for a topic like this? Like what led you to that?
I actually had somebody ask me that question when Rhinos in Nebraska came out. Why did you write it for kids? And honestly, the truth is that's the age that I write for. So that was kind of where I started. And then I came to the idea secondarily. It wasn't that I had the idea and then had to decide what age range I was going to write it for. But I mean, it's probably for ages 8, but I would say it's for all the way up to 108. I mean, you said you were learning things from it, so and you know a lot about these animals.
Well, it's I love that actual age range, and I love thinking about books like this for everyone. So and I know, some of the people in the chat that I'm seeing, like they are equally invested in kind of communicating in a way that can reach so many different people, and this age is perfect for that. So
Yeah.
that's wonderful. So a lot of people sign on might be either parents or caretakers. What are some strategies that you suggest for telling the climate change story geared for those audiences? Like because it's a topic that's really difficult. And so I'm curious what your strategies are or if you have thoughts on that.
So I think it's really important to both keep in mind that one, kids are really smart and they pick up on things and they hear things. And so chances are that they know more than you think they do, or at least they know bits and pieces. So I think it's important to kind of figure out what they've heard. And also, talk to them just in terms that they understand and keep it lighthearted as much as possible. I think it's super, super important, and not just for kids, but for all of us,
Mhm.
because climate change feels like this huge crushing issue. Well, we can't tackle a huge crushing issue, but we can recognize that there are things that we can do. We can take steps to move in the direction of addressing it. And if everybody does these little things, it can really add up in a big way. So for me, it's all about keeping it positive and really empowering kids. Like, here are some things we can do. We can protect these animals that are helping us to fight climate change. We can do these things at home that will help reduce our impact on the environment as well. I think that's just really important to kind of keep it actionable and keep it upbeat as much as you can.
I think that's really true. And I think you do a really nice job of blending that, not only the animal facts and some of the neat, like, I think you should talk a little bit about whale punnados, maybe, because that's heavily featured in the book. This is a very serious, topic. But I think like you do such a nice job of, one, making it accessible and funny, but also just giving us action items. Like, how can you help these animals in your day-to-day life, which, yeah, I just think it's a really nice blend. But maybe you could talk a little bit about whale punnados.
Sure, I can do that.
Something I
So
never thought I'd say in my
that
career.
is that is not my term, by the way. I did not come up with that. I don't
I
know
was
who
hoping
coined
you
that term.
had. I was hoping it was like a little TM and you were gonna market.
No, that would have been great, but no, it wasn't mine. It was other people have used it. I've also seen the term punami, like a tsunami.
Oh,
So when whales poop, they're big animals, and there's a lot that comes out, and it is very it's not solid. It doesn't sink. It's kind of like this cloud of stuff that kind of comes out, and then do it when they're at the surface. And it's really important. It actually drives the entire ocean ecosystem in a lot of ways, because it provides a lot of nutrients. So they feed down deeper in the water, and then when they come up to the surface and you get this big punado, you have this huge cloud of basically fertilizer. There it is. And so we've got phosphorus and nitrogen and iron, which are all things that phytoplankton need in order to reproduce. And so we have these tiny little single-celled phytoplankton up at the surface, and you can get an algal bloom. If you've ever seen, the top of a pond turn kind of scummy with algae, that's an algal bloom. And those are little teeny tiny individual cells that are just reproducing because they got a lot of nutrients. So it's the same thing in the ocean, that you have the whales bringing up these nutrients and stimulating all of this growth with these phytoplankton. Well, that's the base of the food chain, of the entire ocean food chain. And so that stimulates everything else. And the way it can actually help with climate change is when those, well, in a couple of ways, but when those phytoplankton are a certain type called diatoms, they make a little glass house. And when you get lots of those, they need to use up silica to build their little glass houses. And when they run out of silica, they can't reproduce anymore and they start dying off. But those little glass houses are heavy, and so they sink. And it turns out they actually, Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution researchers just recently, in the last couple of years, have been able to measure this. When you have diatoms, they sink really quickly to the ocean floor. It's something like they can reach the ocean floor in less than a week, which is pretty quick, especially for something so small. And they take any carbon that they contain with them. And so that carbon gets buried down in the sediment at the bottom of the ocean, and it's locked away. Once it's reached a certain depth, then it can't get back out to the atmosphere. So tornadoes are pretty amazing.
that's so amazing. No, and in doing some research on this on our side, I love when it shows a couple of things, like poo contributing to the cycle of things. I loved when you were like, don't think too much about how they rely on copepods that they actually feed with their poo. But no, just the cycle of things. And it's always great and I think adults and kids alike, like, we just need to be constantly reminded how interconnected we all are. So I loved I love that. Plus, I mean, when you work with anyone, who is always funny. So always a good way to connect. Um, and I totally agree that climate change, very serious topic, but the best way to break through some of that anxiety we get when we talk about these issues is through humor and
Mhm.
just recognizing how amazing it is, that everything's connected. So Are there like specific stories you want to talk about today or that you feel comfortable talking about that kind of influenced the work that you do around writing for wild animals and just talking about this stuff? Is there anything that kind of really inspired you to get down this path?
So my background is in biology. I was a zoologist and behavioral ecologist, and things kind of shifted for me. I used to be a college professor once upon a time, and things shifted for me because my husband got a job overseas, and so we moved and we had kids, and I transitioned at that point into writing for children because I think it was just a really great way for me to keep sharing interesting things that I knew about, just with a new audience. Um, so I've been doing this for a while now, and I'm almost everything that I do is in some way informed by that background. But one of the things I really love is that whether I'm writing books or whether I'm, writing, because I also write for kids magazines and I also write for web content for some websites, is I get to talk to scientists and I get to hear like, this is the latest thing that's going on. This is the latest thing that we know. And that for me is really inspiring to know, this is where we are. We know what we can do. We have these steps we can take. We just really need to take them. We kind of reached that point where it needs to happen. So all of that is kind of informed where I'm coming from with my writing.
Yeah, I can definitely see it. And I think one of the things that you know, most of us who get into this work, we don't want to be sad all the time. We don't want to talk about how animals aren't doing well. And so like I love that you tap into that passion of the scientists or what's exciting them and then sharing that with others. And I think we have similar strategies for how we do communications because it's similar for me. I feel like climate change can be a pretty daunting thing to talk about, and I certainly, want to bring joy into the job and make sure that people don't just see wildlife and immediately feel guilty, but they see how amazing they are. So
Yes.
no, that's fantastic. So maybe to that point, what's your favorite animal? And then it looks like Jenna wants to come back. So.
Um, that's a really tough call. I gotta say echidnas are up there right now. I just think they're so cool. But I'm also really fascinated by cephalopods, by squid and
Mhm.
octopus, because I mean they communicate with each other through color change, which is so cool. It's so different from anything that we can do. And just, and an octopus can completely camouflage itself. You just stop to think like, what is their life like? And it's so utterly different from anything that we experience. I just think that would be really cool to know more about that. Spend a day as an octopus.
I very much second that. This has been such a great conversation. Allison, we were talking at the head of us going live. You were saying you've been doing a bunch of just school visits and
Mhm.
classroom discussions. And we actually have a question here from Anne who wants to know, like, so you visited schools. What kind of reactions have you gotten from kids and any insights on the things that really have captured their attention or imagination with this? I imagine, as Danielle was saying, the fun and the joy that you're trying to express with this book, I'm sure really resonated. But if you can just speak to the reactions that you've gotten from students, I think that would be great.
Yeah, they are so excited to learn about these animals. It's super fun because the book hasn't come out yet, so they haven't actually read the book, but we talked a lot about it and we talked about the different animals. And I was actually kind of quizzing them. I'm like, all right, here's a forest elephant. Let's see what you know about forest elephants. And then they came back at me with 100 questions about forest elephants, and then we'd have to move on to the next animal. And they're fascinated and they're so excited about these animals and so excited to learn about them and surprised by the things that they're discovering. So the enthusiasm is really fantastic.
That's great to hear. And actually, to piggyback off of that, I know Danielle had asked what your favorite animal is, but we heard that a student then asked you what your least favorite animal is, which I love. And to be honest, then that's the question that I want to be asking people. So just curious what your answer was.
Yeah, that one took me off guard. I had to think about it for a second, but I have to say, because I'm, as a former biologist, I can handle a lot of things. A lot of creepy crawlies, things don't bother me. But the thing that freaks me out are the house centipedes, the ones with all the really long legs that if you smash one, they just keep twitching and they're awful. And as soon as I see one, I leave the room. I don't want to be anywhere near it.
So we have a question here too. What are the biggest challenges when writing about science for a younger audience? How do you balance accuracy with accessibility? And I actually think Danielle would love to hear your perspective too, as I know we have a series on worldwildlife.org that is all about different heroes in the climate fight, right? We have a piece on oysters and a piece on bees. So would love to hear your thoughts as well from WWF's own communications. But Danielle would love to hear your thoughts first on that.
Oh, sure. I mean, I think from my perspective, there's there's a real opportunity to just talk through some of these things and actually writing for any audience, keeping it lighthearted and fun, and using language that is accessible and almost plain language, can really help, I think, connect these conservation concepts. I think one thing that happens a lot when we work in this field is we get very particular about the words we use and we don't always communicate effectively. And so a lot of this comes down to just understanding where there's a breakdown or where there's maybe an opportunity for literacy and just understanding a topic. I know part of what led me to even find Alison was that I was trying to do a similar thing where I was creating a series that was hopefully a little bit more upbeat than maybe our typical climate, language and web story, and really just looking at why wildlife conservation is still a solution. It's still, and the biodiversity loss we're facing, those are all still things that matter and that contribute to helping our climate. And it kind of led us down. There's a lot of scientific literature now more than ever that's showcasing wildlife as great. So that kind of led me, but then to the accessibility side of things, I think accuracy, I think sometimes accuracy, if that's your main value and not actually connecting with people, it can kind of lose, it can lose the communication. So like if you're trying to find the exact word that means that exact thing, but it doesn't relate to people, you're kind of missing an opportunity. But I think Alison probably has great thoughts on this too.
I completely agree with you. And that is actually one of the challenges because I do work with scientists and I always make sure that I have an expert vet what I've written to be sure it's accurate. And sometimes there's some back and forth because they don't like the words that I'm using, because they're not the words that they would use. But I have to meet my readers where they are, which means that I have to figure out, if I'm writing for third graders have this level of knowledge. And so we're starting here and we're building on that. And we're not using the kinds of terms that scientists use because a third grader isn't going to understand them. Most adults may not understand them. And so it's really important that you're starting where your reader is, and that you are explaining things in a way and you're building that knowledge. So you're taking this piece and then you're adding on the next piece and you're adding on the next piece until you get to this bigger concept that you're trying to get across. But you really do have to, your word choice is really important and it's not always easy.
And it comes about connection. And so analogies and other things can help. And that's where the superhero concept is really great because even though there might be some hyperbole and like saying anyone's a superhero, like the truth of it is it's one way to introduce a concept and provide interpretation around some of the scientific work that would otherwise just live on a paper somewhere. And I think that that's what a lot of us, and I see, the participants on the call, I think a lot of us are all trying to do that, right? We're trying to make those connections for people and make it relevant. So I totally agree. And I was very excited to find this book. And I think writing for a younger audience is much harder because you have to really know the topic to know how to highlight the main points. We can rely and almost use some of these some of these conservation words as crutches, right? Like nature-based and blah, blah, blah. But like the truth of it is, we need to be able to describe this to people in a way that's relatable.
And I'll just second, and I know our audience members, when they get their copies next week, they'll see this, but the visuals that accompanied your words, so the illustrations, right, in that comic book style are so powerful, right? So even bringing in people that way, I think is really, yeah. Thank you, Danielle.
I saw a question
Perfect.
in the chat
Yeah.
about like the size of the animals and one thing that I will say that happens in the book, but that we're also trying to do is it draws, there are a lot of, like with every large charismatic animal, there are a ton of other animals that are doing a lot of great work. And so often, we'll use the charismatic animals to introduce a topic, but there's a really nice blend of even a shout out to, bacteria, diatoms, those kinds of other smaller, lesser known animals. So I think it does a nice job of bringing everything together.
Mhm. And actually, before we wrap up, Naomi in the chat put a really just poignant comment that I want to read out. You know, too many stories of human versus nature. So Naomi loves hearing stories about nature helping humans, which I totally agree with. So thank you for that comment. And I guess then just to wrap things up, Allison, you know, what's next on the horizon for you? What's giving you hope for the future? And then Danielle would love to hear your thoughts on that too.
So the things that get, well, so a couple of things. One, I probably spend too much time on Instagram, but I found some
Same.
really great people who post on there, and they're all about bringing really positive climate and environmental news to people because we don't hear that. We only hear the negative, right? And so I've kind of gone out of my way to seek out people who are like, hey, these are all the good things that happened this week. And I find that really useful to just go and spend some time hearing that, okay, no, the world isn't completely falling apart. There are all these little pockets where things are getting better, and those pockets are going to grow, and we can really tackle some of these problems. So there's that. In terms of a writing component, my next few books that are coming out are all focused on things that people are doing to help the environment. So I have a book coming out in the fall. It's called Detective Dogs Are on the Case. It's about conservation dogs that are being used to sniff out invasive species. So we're trying to protect ecosystems that way. I have a book coming out next year called The Wild Mile, which is primarily focused on Chicago, which is actually trying to rewild the Chicago River. They are creating these floating habitats along the riverbanks so that they can bring wildlife back, but also make the river more accessible to people. And then I have a picture book that'll be out. It's 2 years now. It'll still be a little while, about the Tulalip tribes who are trapping nuisance beavers down near Puget Sound and releasing them on their traditional lands in the Cascade Mountains. And they're completely transforming the landscape by doing that. So I'm really interested in kind of showcasing ways that people are really working to make the world a better place.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
You're
I
busy.
I know, I love that. Yeah, I mean, I would say there's a lot of really interesting stuff happening around science and technology and just the work that we're doing here at WWF. You know, I would say biodiversity is starting to get a lot more attention, which is exciting. And it's something, it used to be on a word list, never use the word biodiversity. And I feel like now it's fully embraced.
Offered.
And so that's exciting. I think we're doing a lot around monitoring and using eDNA and some of these monitoring techniques that really we haven't been able to take to scale, but we're starting to be able to. And so that's exciting. I totally agree. I think, you know, like I said, I don't think any of us got into this job to feel sad all the time about what's happening to our world. And yet, you know, I think it's very hard to be this close, but there's a lot of joy and a lot of conservation work that's happening that's really inspiring. And so just seeing the collaboration and part of why I love what I do is I get to meet people like Allison and talk to people about how we can help make things a better place. And I think the more we can integrate wildlife into our life and like our planning, and just think about them, you know, in new ways, I think is a good thing. So.
Well, thank you both so much for your time today, and thank you everyone for joining. As a reminder, if you had family and friends who weren't able to join, we'll be posting this recording to WWF's YouTube page here shortly. And we invite everyone to celebrate with us. World Wildlife Day again is this Sunday, March 3rd. So thank you all so much. We appreciate it, and we'll talk to you all soon. Take care all. Thank you, Allison. Thank you, Danielle. Bye.
Thank you.